Alright, today we are going to be walking through a contract manufacturer video, and this comes from Bear Nutrition. Now, I'm not affiliated with them. This is actually an idea that came through a fellow YouTube viewer / client. Is this video reflective of the manufacturers out there? What are some of the issues or things that you observe in this video that the average layperson may not pick up? Are the steps and activities that they do accurate or reflective of a typical manufacturer? So I'm going to dive into this video and go through the commentary. Now, if this is your first time here, my name is Brian, and it's really good to meet you. And if you don't know me, I've been in the supplement industry since 2004 and specializing in regulatory affairs and quality assurance. And I help these brands, these established brands, as well as brand new startups, comply with FDA, navigate these FTC requirements, FDA requirements, and essentially help them grow their supplement brand. According to this video, it looks like Formulife is the manufacturer for Bear Nutrition. I want to reiterate, this video is not critique or a review of Bear Nutrition supplements or whether Formulife is a good manufacturer or a bad manufacturer. This is more of just a commentary in terms of, what do they do? Is this reflective of what other contract manufacturers do? And what should be your expectations when you're shopping around with manufacturers? All right, so let's dive into that.
All right, guys, so today we are at our manufacturing facility, which is in Dallas, Texas. We have a really strong relationship with our manufacturer. So what we want to do is film a video on how exactly our supplements are made, because it's a very in-depth, thorough process from start to finish. So we have 2 products that are on the line as we speak. Embrace Suck pre-workout is running in 2 different flavors, so we'll get to see that. But we're going to take you from the formulation aspect of R&D to flavoring to blending to testing, all the SOPs involved in the manufacturing process to having a physical product. So today, it's how our supplements are made.
Now, what's interesting about this is that this is a powder product, right? So when we're talking about another dosage form, soft gels, capsules, tablets, liquids, it's going to be a little bit different. So everything today, I imagine, is from the point of view of a powder. And with the powder, you're missing several steps. You're missing the encapsulation step. You're missing the particular testing tied to that encapsulation step. There's more handling. There's more processing involved. But that said, I think we're still going to learn a lot from this video, but it's just something to keep in mind. So right here, first of all, you can tell that the people are gowned up. They've got their masks on. They've got the hair nets on. They got their face mask, the beard mask, which is great to see. It's hard to see a lot of this B-roll, and this is prevalent with all manufacturers. A lot of the B-roll is really tight shots. They show video of the powder filling, the encapsulating, because that's kind of the action, right? The action shot. Normally what I want to see, I look for the design of the facility. I zoom out and look at the ceiling, I look at the floors, I look at the walls, I look at where the machines are in relation to, say, the warehouse. All of this stuff is not normally what people are looking for. They're looking for the flashy, the flashy things, how fast the output is, the encapsulation, and the tableting machine. All of that's really impressive. But what I'm looking for, in addition to the QC checks, the testing, the R&D, is the facility design. And this is something that's often ignored, and it's often ignored in the engineering of the actual facility. A lot of the times people just essentially buy a warehouse, they gut it out, and they just put in manufacturing, and they don't really think about the design aspect and how that could impact cross-contamination, spread of microbial germs. And a lot of the times manufacturers think, well, we're putting all these things to prevent it. That's fine. And here are all the checks in place we are doing to make sure we catch it, which is also good. But what they're not factoring in is, well, what happens if it's already in there? How do you get it out? And that's where that design component is so important. And you can't really fix it once you've actually engineered it, right? You've already put the walls in or put the curtains in. You've designed the layout. You've put the pipes in for the drains. You can't really make these changes, which is why the design component is so important, but sometimes ignored.
I do my research in the supplement field, supplement science, and product development, but we lean on Formulife and the team here to help us create more innovative products with ingredient suppliers.
And I think that's one of the benefits of having a contract manufacturer that not only works closely with suppliers, but also with their brands.
So I think this particular gentleman is the sales rep. I could be wrong here, so I apologize if I am wrong. But the sales rep would be assigned to your account, or your account rep would be assigned to you. And depending on how big your business is, they're going to give you more and more service, right? So this talk about the relationship, R&D development, getting you innovative ingredients, innovative products. Yes, they can do that, but I'm going to say the reality is that you're going to get more of that service when you're a larger brand compared to when you're a brand new startup. And typically what we say is when you're a startup, we don't want to be the ones letting them drive. We want to be driving that discussion. We want to be very, very specific and prescriptive as to what the formula should be, what ingredients need to be in there, what ingredients need to not be in there. And it solves two things. Number one, because they don't know you, they don't know how big your brand is going to be, they'll most likely won't work with you a lot anyway. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect is you really want to make it easy for them to work with you. And then the other one more is the compliance component, right? We want to make sure that we're addressing these things head on. I'm not speaking to Formula Life in general, but I'm going to say in other manufacturing facilities, they're looking at R&D from the point of view of what's cool, what's trending, what's new, but they're not necessarily factoring in the compliance component in terms of the history of use, the safety component, the therapeutic or efficacious dose, because those things might increase the price of your product. They're not thinking about that. They don't want to scare you away. So there are some caveats to this, which is why it's really important for us to drive that, because we're factoring all those things in when we work with clients. We're helping them from an efficacy standpoint, a safety standpoint, a quality standpoint, and we're driving a lot of these discussions and essentially making it so easy for the manufacturers to work with you that they would want to work with you. And because you're a small brand, they're not doing a lot of this service in terms of working with you, this maintenance working with you in terms of a lot of hand holding. You're doing all the leading, and I think that's something that they would definitely appreciate.
Having the suppliers, they are essentially at the forefront of innovation and technology, but getting that technology to the brands is a completely different story. So really telling the product story is huge. So we, the contract manufacturing side, BPN, the brand side, and then the suppliers are basically one cohesive unit working together.
I'll throw one more in. That's obvious. That there is the quality component side. I'm not saying that Formula Life doesn't have that. It's quite possible they integrate that into their system. I'm going to say in general, I'm not picking on Formula Life, that usually the regulatory, the compliance factor isn't well delivered at the manufacturing level. And I would argue the really good manufacturers know this, and they tell you that straight up. So essentially they say, they've acknowledged we're good at getting you trained ingredients, we're good at buying power, we're good at negotiating on your behalf, we're good at encapsulating and testing, but we're not good at label compliance. We're not good at regulatory compliance or quality compliance for the brand level. And they'll tell you explicitly, go find yourself that extra support. And that's what I see with the really good manufacturers. They know what they're good at, they stay in their lane, and they tell you this up front so that you are properly supported, but it's going to be coming out from a different process outside of their primary offering. And to this person's point about this relationship between the contract manufacturer, the brand, as well as the innovative supplier, ingredient supplier, well, you're going to factor in the quality and legal component to the regulatory component. And how does that work? Because there are innovative ingredients that don't have the appropriate approvals, and you get caught when you're trying to get cash flow injections and the investors have the lawyers, etc.
To bring new products, new innovation to the market, we've been really fortunate to work with BPN closely over the past, I'd say about a year, in their growth as not only a brand, but the growth of products within the brand. I think you're going to see some really neat innovation here in the next 3 to 6 months. We have a ton of really cool, innovative new products that are going to be added to the line. And it's kudos to Nick and his team wanting to be as hands-on as possible, wanting to learn and look at what ingredient technology is out there, what new innovation is coming to market, what new flavors that they
Now, in this case, the sales rep is saying that they're the ones going out into the market and looking for the next trendy ingredients, the innovative ingredients, the hot flavors. And that's true. But just know that you can do the same too. Like, you can go to the same conferences, you can go to the same trade shows, you can do your own research and shop around yourself for these things. You might identify the next hot ingredient before they do. There's nothing stopping you. I just want you to know that you can do that as well. And then you can just direct the manufacturer to buy that ingredient or work with that supplier.
Can offer to people like you guys. So, we love having BPN as a partner, and it's just been a really exciting to see their growth, not only from a personal level, but from a brand perspective. You guys are in for a real big treat. So definitely stay tuned.
So the way it works is we'll come up with a product and we decide what kind of flavors we want for that product, and there's usually a range. Like, certain raw ingredients don't work well with certain flavors. So once we find out what flavors we want, we ask for samples come over to us. We test them. Almost every single time the flavors from Formula Life are spot on, and then we can move forward with it. So we'll get a bunch of different flavors sent over. So like right now on our line, we might have, say for example, Flight will have like blue raspberry and green apple. Well, we might have approved multiple other flavors that are already in the system, so that when we want to do limited runs or future runs of new flavors, we have those in the system already that we can just plug and play.
So I just added.
So let's talk about flavoring. Now, something to keep in mind here, I get the impression that Formula Life is doing the flavoring work free of charge. That's not always the case, all right? Some manufacturers might do it free of charge. A lot of them might not. They'll add that extra cost, especially for the smaller brands. They know that in this case with Bare Nutrition, they're gonna have enough volume to make enough profit to absorb the cost for the flavoring work and to pay for this R&D. Of the brand spanking new startups, sometimes there's a cost to that, and just know that you would have to pay out of pocket, or it's built into the actual purchase order, but pending your deposit.
The two flavors that I think are going to go really well for this, and the sweeteners, I'm about to add in the flavoring acids, concentrating on more citric acid than malic, just because citric acid, it'll really enhance that lemonade flavor that we're trying to hit. Another thing that Formula Life does is we excel on making sure that the flavor is exactly what the customer wants. So
okay, so I chuckle because that's true of any manufacturer that does flavoring, especially for powders. When they're working with powders, a lot of these manufacturers know that they have to add flavoring. Now, they can do this in-house, such as Formula Life, but they could also use a third party to help with that flavoring. And I'm going to tell you right now, the reality is that sometimes a manufacturer can't nail flavoring down, right? So not all of them are created equal. And some manufacturers, you're paying a little bit more per unit because of these things built in, the quality of the R&D, the quality of the flavoring, whereas others, they don't charge as much, but their R&D isn't as good. But you just never know what you're going to get, all right? I just want to qualify that. And ultimately, all of them want to match the flavor. They're not going to move to production without your approval on these flavors. So for her to say, like, one thing that's really cool about us is that we want to hit flavors. Well, yeah, who doesn't?
I'm glad that Nick is here in person so he can tell me exactly what kind of tweaks he wants to make so that it's exactly what he wants. So now we have all of our components. We have our flavors, our sweeteners, our flavoring acids, and our masking agent in. I'm gonna weigh out some water, and let's go ahead and try it. So I'm gonna actually have you try this in 10 ounces. Another thing that Formula Life likes to do is to give as many options as possible. So if Nick makes a request for a mango flavor, I'd like to send him at least 2 different types. One, maybe a little bit more natural, a little bit more refreshing of a mango flavor, and then I'll send maybe like a version 2 using that same flavor, or even a different type of mango that's a little bit more tart, a little bit more with flavoring acids, so that it's exactly what he wants, but you also get some good options.
Supplementation for like performance sports is an experience. It's an experience from the time you shake up the bottle, you smell the product, it's fruity, it smells great. You consume it, the experience is great because it tastes amazing, and then you get the effects and the results from supplement. That's an experience on its own as well. So that's the way I always explain like dietary supplements in the sports industry. Is it's an experience from the time you take the bottle off, you shake it up, you drink it, you consume it, you feel it kick in, and you train. So that's what
I'll add one more to that. And he's right. I mean, the supplement isn't just taking the supplement, it's an experience altogether. And I would also argue that it's not just the use of the product and shaking the bottle. It's also the shipping. It's the unboxing experience. It's how you, the extra goodies you might add into your shipping package. It's the way of how you connect with them after the purchase. The entire journey is an opportunity to make you stand out, not just the product itself. And I think a lot of people get that tunnel vision and they think about the product only, which makes sense. But what I'm saying here is that it goes beyond the product. There's so many touch points. The touch points can be as simple as the first time I see you, to the should I buy you, the hum and han, and the assessment of whether you are a brand that I should gamble on and try, to the point where I do the checkout, to the point where product is shipped over to me, the unboxing, as I mentioned, all of that. So it's really important that you're factoring that whole experience into your brand.
I'm a huge fan of, with Formula Life, is their flavors are just so well, and the mixability is amazing. From, product design to formulation to selecting flavors that work with that formula, and then the next step is testing the flavors to make sure they're what you're looking for. Which with raspberry lemonade in Focus, it's light, it's super flavorful. So this is the process from formulation to selecting the ingredients, selecting the flavors, to approving the flavors before we going into blending of the product for production.
So here you're seeing them gowning up, and typically, for all manufacturers, they're supposed to be doing this before you go into the production area, the area that the manufacturer has deemed to be where the encapsulating, the blending is all occurring. Usually this is cordoned off area, and before you get in, you have to gown up, to wash your hands, you have to maybe wear booties, you maybe have to scrub your boots. There's usually some sort of process from a GMP standpoint. You can't just walk in there. So if you do a tour with a manufacturer and there's fairly little, gowning up or some sort of vigilance on this component, they just let you walk freely into the facility. That's something to watch out for. Now, here you see them washing their hands manually. There's nothing wrong with that. I've been in some facilities that are really cool. They actually have like these little hand tunnels you stick your hands in and it'll wash it for you. Like you literally just go in there, everything is timed, the temperature is right, washes it for you, dries it for you, and then you stick your foot into this apparatus and it wraps this booty around you. And then there's ones where you walk through this like air tunnel. It's almost like in the movies where you see people go through the decontamination area and they blow all this air, and I've seen that. When it comes to manufacturing, there's the bare bones all the way to that pharmaceutical level manufacturing. Now, ultimately, they all do the same thing. They're punching out tablets and powders for you, right? But I would say one is the Cadillac, BMW, the Mercedes version, and then the others are the Honda Civic. They ultimately get you from A to B, but they're not all created equal, and that's something to consider in your pricing, right? When you look at just the per unit cost, $5 a bottle, $6 a bottle, $7 a bottle, some are going to charge more because they have more processes in place. They have a way better infrastructure, better design. You're buying the BMW version versus the Honda Civic, so you're paying for that per unit. It's something to factor into your calculations, into your budget. It's not always just the dollar value. I mean, of course, that has a lot of weight, but it's something to consider. Plus all the other extra procedures that they're putting in. And I'm talking about compliance. When it comes to compliance, there's so many things that FDA gives you leeway to do. It also gives you leeway to do sometimes. And some manufacturers would like to do it all the time, right? And they build that into the process. And it's really hard for the sales rep to kind of brag about these things because they don't have a compliance background. But from an infrastructure standpoint, they do that all the time for every client. And so you have to share that overhead, and that adds that cost to it as well. So even though the per unit number might seem high, there's a reason for it, and it's really important for us to make sure we factor that into our decision making. I'm just pausing this because, I like to see the facility here. Again, a lot of the times we're looking at the fancy B-roll. There's nothing fancy here happening. But what am I looking at in this particular scene? I just want to make sure that, I just want to see, if there's anything on the floor, if there's any hoses on the floor. You see how the hoses are hanging up from the ceiling. They're looped on. Like, these are good practices. It's showing that they're trying to keep things off the floor. There's contamination on the floor. It can be easily picked up and put on a table. I've seen that. I've seen tools fall on the floor or like a scoop fall on the floor or something along those lines. And the production, the operators, now common sense would dictate you would never put that back on the table or put that on production. Now, the average person, the production worker, might not know that. They might think, well, I don't want to put it on the floor and keep it on the floor because someone might trip on it. So they put it on a table that no one's using. And now let's just say that there's some sort of contamination on that spoon or a scoop or whatever. They're putting it on a table that no one touches, right? And so now they get rid of the spoon, but that spoon touched the table. And then someone else puts a bowl or some other apparatus or another clean spoon on that table. They didn't know that the dirty one was on there, and now you're spreading contamination around. So things can spread really, really quickly in this type of facility, especially when there's so many ingredients in there. We're dealing with powders. It's not homogeneous, meaning like, bacteria can get trapped into things. And it's not well dispersed, right? Like, it's hard to pick up sometimes, even through testing. And so again, I go back to what are the procedures are in place? How are they doing it? How clean is their facility? What are the behaviors that's automatically done by the operators, by the production workers? That's so important. And so far, based on this one scene, things look fine and things are off the floor, and which is a good sign.
One new product we're working on though, which we haven't launched ever, is it's a capsule-based product. So right now our whole line is powders, but we're doing capsules. So a machine like this is what we're going to run for capsules. It does about 90,000 capsules per hour. So when we bring that product to life, to the market, we'll be able to run 90,000 capsules in 1 hour for that production line.
Depending on the size of the
All right, so again, what am I looking for? So they're showing them the tableting room. What do I like here? I like how clean the floor is. It's not packed. Sometimes the warehouses are jam-packed of finished product, raw materials, no one's picking it up. Sometimes it's just poorly organized. The shipping is poorly organized, and then things get backed up. And where do they put it? They store inventory, they store bulk, they store a finished product in the hallways and on the pallets. But right now, this particular scene of the hallway looks clean. There's nothing really in front of that exit, although there is that pallet there of goods. The other thing is that things are on pallets. I do see that one bin that's not on a pallet. A small thing, but it is a thing. But overall, really clean. The other thing I like about this is you've got fully divided doors and rooms and walls. Some facilities do not do this. And it's not saying that those facilities are bad. I'm just saying not all facilities are created equal, right? The infrastructure, the capital that was used to build is going to vary. A small startup, someone that just started, going to use a business park. They rent out the space, they gut it out, and they put in different areas and they curtain it off, right? Versus something like this that has segregated rooms. And like I said, I've seen some really, really sophisticated facilities that are really, really nice, very, very pharmaceutical level, air controlled everything, temperature, humidity controlled everything. The direction of airflow is controlled throughout the entire process to minimize contamination. All of it really, really good lighting. But here, overall thoughts are, things are good so far, very clean.
Tablet, how much you want per tablet, you adjust the pressure and it'll give you a different weight of the tablet. So, it's the same science behind every single tablet, it's just the parts that are getting used.
So right now, we're actually working on a tablet product itself. That was in research and development. We approved it, I sampled it for 25 plus days. So I found that the most interesting part of this is, capsules, it's putting the powder in the capsule and closing the capsule. Powder, it's mixing the powder. Tablets though, like a lot of vitamins or tablets or some test boosters, it's literally powder going into a form, and the pressure is what solidifies that tablet, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I think right now we're kind of working with you on some cool customization, maybe some custom stamps for BPN.
Yeah, so a tablet with BPN stamped in is something that we're working on right now.
Okay, so let's talk about that custom stuff. Manufacturers will do anything custom for you. It's all about money. And I would argue that a BPN, these guys have the money to pay for that. If you want to get custom molding, custom tooling, that's several $1,000s plus a very, very long lead time. Usually it's made overseas and then shipped over, then they have to do the tests. And because it's for you and you only, it's very, very expensive to do typically. So just know that, even though they talk about these things, it's not normally something that the startup would do.
As you can see, we're running some Embrace the Suck today. So we haven't launched it yet. It's the first time we're going to be showing it. The next flavor of Embrace the Suck is Cherry Limeade, which is these labels.
So the audio here is really bad. There's a really bad hissing sound. I'll see what we can pick up, and hopefully I'll just edit all this stuff out. But it looks like they're not in production area. They're in the warehouse now. You could see earlier that there was a snapshot of the label. So let's see where this takes us, because the warehouse is really important. The warehouse, there's a lot of activity. It is technically out of production, but with a lot of these facilities, it's very close to production. And so the call out here is that warehouse is where you have a lot of foot traffic. You have a lot of exterior traffic, outside trucks, outside employees. They're not gowned up. And in some cases, the design is not great, where it's in very, very close proximity to production. I've seen that, and I've seen contamination spread from the warehouse over to production. So I'll keep my eyes open for this, but we'll see how this video goes considering the hissing in the background.
Right here. So that's running today, and then sour gummy candy is also running as well. The steps of safety and approval with our contract manufacturer is, as soon as every raw ingredient comes in this facility, it gets put on QC. So like the red sticker right here under this.
Okay, so in this particular example, he's saying any incoming material coming from the manufacturer, coming from the trucks, is quarantined automatically, which is a good process. And then from there, the quality team is going to do their checks in order to say, yep, this can be released out of quarantine and into the production facility, and then be used for future production. The thing here to note, and I suspect they're going to be talking about how it's all QC tested, etc., is that, what is the scope of QC testing? And this is a big gray area, and it's not necessarily well specified in the regulations. All the regulation says is that you need to test for identification, which essentially is saying, is it what it is, what it says it is, right? ID, identification. So if it's vitamin C, that it is indeed vitamin C. That's all. It's a test for identification. Doesn't test for any other thing. It does not ask for specifically any other contaminants, potency testing, like the amount of vitamin C, heavy metals, microbial. It doesn't necessarily say those things, okay? So given that, there are manufacturers out there that say that they do their internal QC testing, but their internal QC testing does the bare minimum, which is just ID testing, and they don't test for the other things because that's technically permitted in the regulations. Now again, the more sophisticated manufacturers realize that you could do that, but they don't. They test more frequently, whereas others don't. And so they build their costs differently, right? The manufacturers that don't test as much, they're working off, a smaller budget, a smaller cost, and therefore they think that they can charge less. Whereas the larger manufacturers, the more sophisticated manufacturers, is testing every lot. They are actually doing full testing more frequently or testing every lot, but their overhead increased. So again, you're paying more for that BMW service. There's a lot more that goes into designing a BMW and engineering and manufacturing a BMW versus, say, a Honda, right? And so that's something to factor in, and it's not necessarily reflective in the finished product quote, because at the end of the day, maybe you just want vitamin C and ashwagandha ginseng capsule, and on paper they look the same, but when you dive into the manufacturing and the quality compliance and the programs, it could be very different. I'll throw in one more thing for you, and that is, just because a manufacturer says that they can offer and do all these tests, they might not do it for you. That's the other thing that a lot of people forget, or sales reps neglect to say or tell you. They'll do all these things because they can do it, but they might not necessarily do it for you because you're a small brand. And they only do it for the large brands or the brands that tell them or ask them to do it for them. They might have the capabilities to do all the testing you want, but by default, they don't want to scare you away, so they quote you cheap. But they're doing it under the assumption of like a very, very slim process, if you will, and just doing the bare minimum. And they'll take the approach of, unless you tell them otherwise, they're not doing the fancy stuff for you. They're just going to do the bare minimum stuff for you. So there's a lot of uniqueness that's given to each customer, and which goes back to like, Brian, why don't you just tell me which manufacturers are good? I could tell you which which manufacturers I believe are good, but are they going to be good for you? Can you afford that, right? Your ingredients might be different. They might have a different minimum order. There's so much variability, plus employee turnover. I'm talking about leadership turnover, sales rep turnover. Sometimes the sales reps, some are better than others. There's so many variabilities that go into the experience, which makes it harder for me to say this manufacturer is always good and all the time for you. Anyway, let's get going.
That means it needs to be checked. It needs to be sampled. So as soon as this raw ingredient, like this is whey protein from Glanbia, our protein supplier, as soon as it comes in the facility, it gets tested, and they take a sample, they test it in the lab to make sure that it is exactly what they expect it to be.
Yeah, so again, let's really think about what this is. So a lot of people watching this believe that they're going to do a full panel testing. Again, I'm going to reiterate, that doesn't necessarily mean that. Just because they do a testing, remember, FDA gives them leeway. You can dictate, as the manufacturer, you can dictate which testing is required. And as a result, other than ID is the only one that you have to do. And identification just says that it's whey protein. That's it. Doesn't mean that you're testing for microbial hazards, chemical contaminants, allergens, that type of stuff. So all he's saying is that it gets quarantined and it needs to test to confirm that it is what it is, which word for word, that's accurate. But I don't want the layperson to assume that that means full testing. I think that there's usually a disconnect there, and they assume there's full testing being done. And the reason why I bring this up is when there's a problem, that's when they call me in and they're like, Brian, my manufacturer does all these tests. And I'm like, no, they're not. Are you sure that they are? And then we dive into it and like, oh, actually they didn't. And then they're like, well, why didn't they? This is why. Their standard protocol may be very different from what your expectations or your assumptions were. And this is why when we work with clients, we work with manufacturers, we clarify all these things. We want to make sure all of this stuff is buttoned up for you.
As soon as they test it and approve it, it gets the blue QC approved sticker, which means, all right, now we can run this in production. So every single raw ingredient that comes in here gets tested for accuracy, and so they know exactly what it is.
On our lines, we have one of those machines set up so it actually sucks any of the excess powder that would normally go up into the air. It sucks it in.
So that's pretty cool. It's a dust collector. And I would say that this is interesting because it's actually on the line. Some manufacturers do not have this. The powder will just spill everywhere and you have an operator at the end just wiping the powders down. And again, it depends on how fluffy the material is. It's kind of cool that they actually have this. I do know that in other manufacturing facilities, they do have these dust collectors in individual rooms, but this is like right up there against the product, which I think is kind of cool. But I would say that it's fairly standard to have dust collectors in other production rooms, but just not this close to the product.
Into this huge machine and comes in here. So it helps from a cleanliness perspective. The cleanup is a lot quicker. And then our air quality throughout the whole facility is a lot cleaner.
Just see if I can go back here. So you can see here in the scene, I always like to, again, I just like to look at the background because that's really where the story is. And it's hard to really tell because everything's so blurred out. But you do have some roll up doors, and I think someone walked in there. You know, I'm really curious. For me, I'd be like, okay, you know, what's the restriction? Because literally someone can go from the warehouse to production and back. Now, that's not necessarily always a bad thing. It's just more of a, that's interesting because I alluded to it earlier that there could be that contamination from a warehouse area to production. And, you know, if we think of the logic of these guys had to get gowned up, right, and wash their hands and all that before they go to production, well, what about the warehouse people? Like, if they're just employees, they can freely go into production. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is what happens for Formula Life or that there's a vulnerability. It's just more of, if I were there, I'd poke around at this and dig into this a little bit more.
And our air quality throughout the whole facility is a lot cleaner.
See, there you go. You saw that person walk in into the production. I don't know what's happening there, where they're going, or maybe it's not even production, for all I know. I'm just saying I've seen that in the past. And again, this is just something to note for myself, usually when I'm walking through doing a tour with a facility.
Cleaner.
So this will be cool for Preston because Preston has never seen one of our products being run, and they are running Embraces Suck as we speak, the 2 flavors. So we'll show them that and document the process.
So I just wanted to hit on this because for powders, I know powders is a very, very popular dosage form. Something to factor in is slack fill. And now you want to have enough headspace, like empty space in the bottle for this process here, for the filling, for the nozzle to go in, fill it up, and to do it with enough space so that the powder's not going to kick up too much. Now, that said, you're going to be left with a certain percentage of empty space. And as product gets transported, the powders settle even more, which may reveal even more empty space. And we do see a lot of litigation on slack fill, especially in the state of California. Something to factor in, that you really want to pick the right size tub to make sure that you minimize the amount of headspace or empty space and have only just enough. And sometimes when I go on the line, I like to see how this is filling and how much space is left by default at this production stage. And it just helps from my understanding. And should you ever get a slack fill, notice of some sort or a suit against you, at least you kind of know what you're in for. So here they're manually putting in the scooper. Nothing wrong with that. It looks like everything is gowned up. They're using gloves. They've got a liner there in the box. Standard issue. I have seen some scoops that are done automatically. It doesn't really matter. You see here how like the bottles are completely exposed and going down the line, probably where the lids are at. Usually what I look for is like, what's up top? What's up the ceiling? Sometimes, there's like a vent and there's condensation and mold on it, or there's like hoses up there. You just never know. Again, this is why I like to zoom out. We can't do that here, but it just gives you some thinking as to what I look for when I'm going through a facility. See that you can see here that the someone's like wiping off the bottles just of any residue. You see the product coming off the line, and you can also see here that in the background it looks like this is the warehouse. So it's quite possible that they're doing packaging in the warehouse. Now I've seen this happen in the past, and I would say that ideally you don't want them to be packaging in the warehouse. It's still manufacturing. You're still there's still exposed product at one point, and then until it's fully enclosed. And so the better manufacturers, I would argue, at least from a GMP standpoint and design standpoint, they would have factored this in and not put a packaging line in the warehouse. Usually the reason why this happens is as the facility grows, they realize, well, we'd rather have another blender or another encapsulation machine. We got to use that space up now to kick out our packaging line and put it in the warehouse. And like I said, the warehouse is not really the place to do it. It has been done, and of course, if you try to control it, the chances of some sort of contamination is relatively not high, I would say, but it's much more. And for me, I'm like, well, it's still a very important GMP component, that step. You have exposed product, let's get that into a different room, a separate room. And that's usually where it is. Like I said, the more sophisticated, high, bigger square footage facilities would not put these types of activities in the warehouse. And you're getting a lot of traffic there. You're getting a lot of visitors. You're getting, truck drivers that are coming through. And then you have like ingredients coming through. You also might have pests like rats and stuff. So it's just, for me, it's not something I normally prefer. I'm not saying that Formula Life has this. They may have removed the packaging line by now. Again, all this is telling me is it's just something to look and further explore. When I see this, cool. All right, how are they minimizing some of these issues?
Now, Tex is explaining the blending process. Specifically, they're blending protein powders right now, how exactly that works. But the way we started working with Formula Life, our contract manufacturer, is that I've been working with Tex in the supplement industry for a while, and Formula Life follows such strict SOPs, standard operating procedures, for one, safety, for two, adherence and quality control, and three, just product development. So from testing raw ingredients and quarantining till they're tested for accuracy when they come into the manufacturing facility, to testing products while they're on the line, to quality control as they're coming off the line. Everything from beginning to end, and safety and procedures is why we use this manufacturer here. Right. So the next stop.
So I just want to hit on that a little bit more and elaborate. So he's not wrong. They are testing throughout the process. And I just really, really want to emphasize that testing is only one very, very important aspect of it. And then there's another component of it that's not testing. It's all the things that they do prior to testing that's just as important. It's no different than working out, right? It's one thing to go and do the bodybuilding competition or the marathon, but it's another thing to do all the right things, the sleep, the training, the eating well. That stuff isn't fun. There's nothing sexy about it. There's no celebration or anything really to brag about. Going to bed at 8 in the evening to get up at 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning, whatever, to start training, and you're eating the same foods every day. It's very similar to that. So yes, testing is important. Everyone talks about testing. So to me, the novelty of testing and the importance of testing isn't really there. And when you have a problem, it's the testing will catch it, but then you have to fix it. And in order to fix it, usually the problem is all the upstream stuff. It's all the stuff that led to the testing. Before you hit the testing component, it's all the things that the production workers did, and the training and the behavior and the design of the facility and the leadership that's building that culture. If that stuff's not there, I don't care how many times you test. With testing, it's roll of the dice sometimes. And sometimes the testing won't catch it. It's just like with COVID. Sometimes you get a false positive or a false negative. So the testing doesn't, even though you're doing it a lot of the times, it might not catch it. And so it really comes back to the other half of the equation, which is all the things you do prior to the testing. That's so important. And that's where a lot of people ignore it because it's not as sexy as the word testing. And so again, when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with manufacturers and these brands, I'm looking at both sides. Yes, they all want to brag to me about testing. I'm like, everyone does it. I don't care. Like, I'm glad you're doing it. Good. Keep doing it. But I need to see what you guys are doing up front, upstream, and before the testing. And that's so important. And let's just be real. When there is an issue, let's just say you're testing throughout and the testing, maybe the test method was fine. Maybe it's not sensitive enough. So it's getting through the process, right? It's getting downstream. And then all of a sudden, boom, the very last thing you found, there's an issue. There's a failure. And now you have to kind of like work your way back up and figure out where did the failure happen. But if you're always going in with that right mindset and culture and behavior and the procedures in place to really make sure that it's all done properly, regardless of whether there's a test or not, that's really going to minimize all of these things. And when you're investigating, you'll find these issues much faster and identify the specific root cause because of all these other procedural things that were done in place, regardless of testing. So that I just want to clarify, because when you talk to the sales rep, they're going to be like, we test this, we test this, we test. They all say the same thing. It's the same spiel wherever you go. And to me, I'm like, okay, I really don't care about that. Let's talk more about what you guys are doing up front or upstream.
Up on today's tour is the lab. So this is like one of my favorite parts of it. Standard operating procedures and testing is super important, and the adherence to it is so important because of one, safety, quality control, and then product development. So I'm not the expert in this field, but Erica is. So I'm going to hand it over to her. She's going to talk about the importance of everything we do here in the lab.
Eric Goldstrom, I'm the lab manager for the quality control lab. So the main thing we do first and foremost is when raw materials come in, they're either identified, there's also a few other components, as well as sometimes micro testing. So
you see there what they said? Now, remember I talked about this. When the incoming materials come in, they get tested, they get identified. So that's the one thing they need to do. And then they say, we sometimes test for micro. So again, I go back to my original point where don't assume that just because they say we test the raw material, that they're doing all the testing, right? There's a disconnect there. That what we think we're hearing what they're saying, but they're not saying that, what we think we're hearing, okay? And so again, this is where the confusion happens, because when there's an issue, they're like, Brian, how could this possibly happen? We test our raw materials. I'm like, well, what does testing the raw materials really entail? What does that really mean? And then we dive into that with the manufacturer, like, well, we don't actually do this, we don't actually do this, we don't actually do this. Well, there you go. Now we know why we had the issue. Again, this is why when we're working with a manufacturer or with a client, we're trying to dive into these things where appropriate, right? Depending on the level of the brand, where your budget, the type of manufacturer you're working for. We have to scale this in proportion to you. But I just really want to highlight this important on point of we gotta listen carefully to what they're saying, and then we have to verify that with them for your specific product. Just because they're doing all this stuff as a procedure in general doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it for you. So it's really important for us to double check, triple check. And I know a lot of people are like, Brian, why do I have to double check, triple check? You don't. You're not supposed to. You shouldn't have to. But there's a reason why the supplement industry has the bad reputation. There's a reason why you do read about these news articles where they test the product and it's under label claim, or that people got sick, or there's high contaminants. There's a reason for that. And unfortunately, we're still in that situation where we have to trust but verify. Trust but verify. Just pretend you're buying a Volkswagen, right? Let's just say you want private label of Volkswagen. You want Volkswagen to make you a car and slap your label on it. You could trust them and trust their emission rating, right? Their efficiency rating, their fuel efficiency rating. But I would argue you also want to verify. You want to do some checks. You want to make sure that they're doing it properly. And yes, you could say I shouldn't have to, but ultimately, if that emission scandal came out and that was your brand, not Volkswagen, you're the one that has to speak to the lawyers, speak to the public, speak to the press, not Volkswagen, the manufacturer, right? So it's the same idea. Yes, you shouldn't have to double check, but because this is your brand, this is technically your product, and knowing the state of the industry and how gray the requirements really are, fortunately, my role exists for that purpose. And yeah, we do have to double check, and we've caught a ton of stuff, and I'd rather you know now before you put a single dime down on a PO, or before you went into production, or at least you know so that you can make an educated decision.
And that can happen by a few different methods. The main one is going to be using the FTIR, Fourier Transmission Infrared Spectroscopy, and that will just basically give us, using our standard database, it'll give us a good idea, not a good idea, a great idea of actually what the material is. And that covers in case, the manufacturer labeled it wrong, or if maybe the supplier did something, it'll let us know exactly what it is. We also do TLC testing with thin layer chromatography, just to make sure that it is the botanical it says it is, not just standardized to what we buy botanicals for. After we've actually approved the raw.
So those they're fancy words, and I'm glad they're doing this. Essentially, they're doing identification testing. So again, this is the potency testing, this is contamination testing. Again, I'm not saying that they don't do it. I'm just saying in this context here, these fancy words get thrown out, and that's fine. Obviously, they are called what they're called. But I just want you to know that this is all in the scope of identification testing, and this is standard protocol. Essentially, don't get don't fall for it, right? Just know what this is, what it's intended to do, and that's as far as it goes. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, they do thin layer chromatography, they're a great manufacturer. That is not always the case. All they're saying is that they use TLC, thin layer chromatography, for identification. Great. They use IR. Great. But that's just one step in the process. Just don't fall in love with them because they use these fancy words.
Materials and identified exactly what it is and made sure that it's good to go. After it's being blended, it's called in-process sampling, and they'll bring us a book. And in-process sample. So this actually happens before it even gets bottled with a label, finished product, ready to ship and sell. We do pH testing, organoleptic, make sure it looks the same, tastes the same by our R&D department, as well as we give it an FTIR fingerprint. It's not necessarily an ID, but it gives us a good picture of continuity for every batch that you guys do, just to make sure that that fingerprint stays the same.
Now that's really cool. I would say that all manufacturers do in-process testing. They all say that they'll, if you ask them if you do in-process checks, they will say yes. The difference is what kind of in-process checks, right? It's always the thing. Well, yeah, we do GMP compliance. Well, what does that entail? And so it's the same thing here. A lot of manufacturers will do these in-process checks. They will check for the weight of the capsule, the appearance. They might look at the friability of a tablet, that type of thing, the hardness. In this particular case, they're doing some ID testing. They might be doing some organoleptic, meaning they'll taste the sample as it's being run, which is cool. You don't normally see that a lot. So it's really nice that they've added that in there. And again, this is what you're paying for. There's that extra overhead. We just don't know what you might be getting. It's not so simple to just measure the quote and then assume that all products are created equal. They are not. Some manufacturers add these extra steps into their process as prescribed by their QA leadership team, right? And that hopefully they can speak to this during the sales process. But it's really hard for the average layperson to really appreciate these things, especially when we're talking in generalities. When you're saying, hey, do you test for this? Yeah. Do you do in-process checks? Yeah. But then really the gold is in what kind of checks are you doing? And you do need someone that can understand and appreciate what they're telling you. If someone were just to say, yeah, we do TLC, HPTLC, we do organoleptic testing, some people have no idea what that means, and it's really hard for them to understand or appreciate, is that a good thing or a bad thing, or is that just an everyday thing? And again, that's where we help our clients and give them that perspective.
The third thing, after finished goods are labeled, bottled, it's done, we do micro testing. And that ensures that basically it's good for your customer to buy. It's, again, not harmful, no ifs, ands, buts about it. Usually only.
So the micro testing is the salmonella, yeast and mold, total plate count. And, for the most part, manufacturers definitely focus in on the micro testing. Oh, we're talking about finished product testing. Again, micro testing is usually like the one thing that they really need to do, but they don't always do heavy metal testing. They don't always do other contaminant testing, phthalates, BPA. They might not do potency testing or allergen testing. Right now, at the finished product level, usually manufacturers are focused on micro testing. And I think for a lot of you, you're thinking like, no, well, I want to verify the amount in my product. So you have to do all these other things. But again, it's really important for us to identify that and call it out and request those tests. If you don't, it might get missed. All right.
It takes about 2 days. Other thing I want to highlight would be our HPLCs. These are good for quantification. So again, when I said we not only ID the material, whether it's a raw, finished good, or even an in-process sample, we like to identify and quantify various aspects about it. So both of these are running, we have a third one over there, and that'll basically quantify whether it's, you guys label claim it's 200 milligrams per caffeine per serving, that sort of thing. Or if it's just a raw material and we want to make sure before we buy it from that manufacturer that it is 99.9% caffeine, creatine, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. So they are doing the potency assays. Now, the caveat here is how often do they do it? Do they every lot? And are they doing it for you, right? So if they're going to test on the raw materials, some manufacturers don't test every lot. And that's fine. That's within the confines of FDA. And some manufacturers, it totally makes sense. I'm not poo-pooing that at all. I think there's a time and place for that, and it makes sense, okay? Again, I just don't want you to go in assuming that all lots are tested all the time. And then your finished product, they're probably doing it for Bare Nutrition and might be included as part of their service. Just don't assume that's going to be included for you. All right, that's the call out. Don't assume that all the stuff that this manufacturer is doing, they're doing it for Bare Nutrition. They're going to do it for the certain clients that have requested it for it. If you don't call it out, they're not going to do it.
When you bring a raw ingredient into this facility, like for example, creatine is a white powder, and so citrulline malate is a white powder.
Exactly.
So you want to make sure that creatine is what it says it is at that percentage. Some ingredients like huperzine and other ingredients have certain percentages of.
They're standardized to something. Whether it's 1% huperzine or whether it's a fenugreek and it's 50% saponins, anything like that. We double check that before it goes into anything.
Absolutely ensure that what's in your product, you know exactly what it is at what dosage and that pure of the ingredient. So testing comes in before coming in and then testing the product again before it goes out to us before we distribute.
So this is a good point. So they're saying here, we do test the raw materials for the potency, right? We're quantifying the amount. So if it's huperzine or saponins in the example, they're testing to make sure it is what it is and at the amounts that they're supposed to be in. In the regulations, it does not require that. I said earlier, it only requires ID testing. Everything else is kind of like gray and up to the manufacturer. And so a lot of manufacturers leverage this to reduce the costs of testing. And so they don't have to do this, and as a result they don't test for these things. And so again, I just want to, the reason why I'm reiterating this over and over again is I just want you to know that this is one of the challenges of when we're shopping for a manufacturer to factor that into our decision making. If they're adding these services in, is it part of their default process, or are they even doing it at all? Typically when you ask a sales rep, they're going to just assume that they're doing it. Sometimes they don't even know. Sometimes they talk to their QC team and the QC team just says, they mumble yes. Right? And for me, when I'm working on, qualifying a manufacturer or having these discussions on the behalf of the client, I want to talk to their QA department. I want to speak to them. I don't want to speak to the sales rep. When the sales rep's like, well, let me answer these questions for you, I'm like, eye roll. Because ultimately they could be embellishing things. Maybe the program has changed since they last talked to the QA department. There could be so many differences, and 9 times out of 10 there are. Usually when I'm like, okay, cool, I'll listen to the sales rep give me the spiel and tell me what they think it is, I still want to double check. When I double check, aha, there was a difference. Now I'm not gonna like get mad at the sales rep. The sales rep's doing their job the best that they can. I get it, but there's a reason why I want to verify all this stuff with them, and just know, again, just because Formula Life is doing this, it doesn't mean these other manufacturers are, and a lot of them don't, because it increased their overhead costs, and they don't want to increase those overhead costs, and they don't want to scare you away with a higher per unit price, and they don't do these things, and in their minds it's within the confines of what FDA allows. Now maybe that's true, but once you start producing product, once you start testing products, you're going to identify all these problems, and because they were lazy upstream, it's really hard to pinpoint where the fault really happened, and then you have to do more testing and investigation, and it's very time consuming. So something to consider.
Every VPN product that is made here has an MMR, Master Manufacturing Record. So essentially
The master manufacturing record is required by regulations, so it's not just Formula Life, it's all manufacturers. Now some MMRs are better than others, just like how some CFAs are better than others, right? But I just want to clarify that component. So all these things that Formula Life is doing, quarantine of raw material, testing of raw material, yeah, the scope of testing might be different, but they are doing the testing. They are testing finished product, they are blending, they are flavoring. So from an activity standpoint, all manufacturers do it, and I just want you to know that, because I don't want you to think that some manufacturers are skipping some of these altogether.
MMR is a fingerprint of every product, and it traces back every time we run that lot. So it's like a recipe for, like, say, flight. The ingredient, where the ingredient is sourced, at what dosage, on what date it was bought and made, and every time we run that batch or that supplement, it's added to the MMR. So this is, like I said, it's a fingerprint of a product over a lifespan, as long as it's run and forever.
So yeah, that's true, again, of all manufacturers, all right? All supplement manufacturers that have that GMP certification, third-party certification, would have the MMR, and it's required by regulations, required by FDA. There's been a lot of warning letters and observations found where some manufacturers in the past didn't have the MMRs done, or they weren't done sufficiently. But I just wanted to highlight, there's nothing new here, all right? I use the classic example of, oh, my water is gluten-free. Well, buddy, all water is gluten-free. So that's the example there. It was actually quite insightful to go through Formula Life and their manufacturing facility. Things may have changed. This video is several years old now, so their facility could be way different. It could be at a brand new facility now, for all we know. And again, this is not knocking or criticizing Formula Life or Bare Nutrition. It has nothing to do with it. We're just using this as an example to walk through the activities of a typical manufacturer and really going down into what I normally observe or see. Now, if you want to work together, 2 ways. I have my signature one-on-one consultation session. We could definitely get together and book a time and look at your brand and answer all your questions and identify any regulatory hurdles. Also, we do offer online training, the Supplement Startup Essential Training, also known as SET. We have that as well to kind of give you more of the information you need and the tactics and strategies and principles to go put a brand together and then go shopping for a manufacturer and have a better understanding of how to qualify them. And then you could also combine the two. You could purchase the SET program with the one-on-one trainings at a discounted rate. Anyway, I'll leave it there. It was a pleasure. Until then, cheers.